My name is Ines Bellina, and I am a meme. Specifically, I am one of those cool aunt memes, the one that says, "You're the cool wine aunt that occasionally comes back to the country for a brief visit before leaving for another long exotic vacation. You have no commitments and a suspicious amount of money." Except I'm not in the country for a brief visit. I moved back to Peru after living in the States for 18 years, and I am currently debating how permanent I want that decision to be. I also don't have a suspicious amount of money, just enough to get by as an unmarried 40-something with no kids, which, in this day and age of hyperinflation and sinking salaries, is still never enough. What is true is that I do not have any commitments, at least not of the marital kind, since my divorce over a decade ago. And it is true that I like my wine, but not so much that I make it my entire personality. Okay, so I guess a more accurate meme of me would be, "You're the cool aunt with no commitments." And it is true that having no spouse and no kids made it a lot easier to pick up my bags and leave New York. It will also make it a lot easier if I ever decide to pick up said bags and leave Lima once more. But to say that kids don't weigh on me when I'm debating whether to stay in Peru or to go back to the US would be wrong. To be a cool aunt, you have to have nieces, or, in my case, nephews. Maybe you want to see them grow up, be an active participant in their lives. But to see them grow up, you also have to be willing to stick it out as an unmarried, 40-something woman with no kids in a city where that is not the norm. And in a parallel universe where I would have had kids, would I have preferred to have them in the US? To have them in Peru? Would I have stayed in the US? Or would I have gone back to Peru? Welcome to, but you can't stay here. Last year, I went to the gynecologist, and she had some big news for me. Yes, we're going there. We are quickly descending into the TMI category on Apple Podcasts. Her insight into my body marked such a before and after that I, of course, had to make fun of it in front of an audience of strangers.
Thanks so much for coming. So a couple of months ago, I went to the gynecologist and she confirmed what I suspected, which is that I'm fully in perimenopause. Yeah, we're gonna keep the menopausal vibes going. Which I know might surprise people because I do look younger than my age. No Botox, no fillers, no 258 threads holding it together. This isn't a humble brag, this is my way of telling you I'm a writer hoping to make stand-up a lucrative career. But no, real story, she went in there, she did the whole ultrasound, she looked into my ovaries, and instead of finding eggs, she found a nightmarish portrait that reflected every single sin in my corrupted soul. So that's the secret to my skincare routine.
Every day that you finally get the opportunity to squeeze a Dorian Gray reference when talking about your ovaries. And it's not every day that you're told by a medical professional that your eggs, and therefore your chances of bearing children, are in their flop era. At 44, you'd think this would be obvious. But I'm convinced God likes to turn me into a cautionary tale. And I feared being the one about the 40-something woman who thought she could no longer get pregnant, got reckless, and had a baby 9 months later. If you don't believe me, I'll introduce you to one of my exes, who was that baby. Better yet, I'll just cite the statistics from the National Center for Health Statistics that says nearly 4% of all new babies are born to women over 40, and about a third of those are big bundles of unplanned joy. For the first time ever in the US, women over 40 are having more babies than teens. But after decades of anxiously awaiting my period and popping birth control pills as if they were a communion host, I was thrilled. It merited an Instagram story where I gleefully wrote, "There are no eggs in my ovaries. I repeat, there are no eggs in my ovaries. The squatters have left the building. I like to thank science and my strict adherence to rules for never being a little bit pregnant. Justice for the pill, I freaking love whatever additional hormones they gave. Inez out." I've known for a long time that I didn't want kids, but how I came to that decision was more of a slow, intuitive realization than a hardcore pros and cons analysis. Frankly, I wish my decision had come out of a logical, cold calculation, so I would have a more persuasive explanation when men I date ask me about it. Side note, I can't believe I haven't aged out of men asking me about it, especially when I see their receding hairlines, the whites in their beard, the ways they groan when they get up to order another IPA while wearing an LCD sound system tee. I want to ask them if they have the energy to stay up all night tending to a newborn, or if that was just a thing they assumed a mother of their child would exclusively take care of. But since we're not in a date, I won't be combative with you, listener. I'll just share. I never hated kids. In fact, I'm quite good with them. At this ripe old age, I still love playing make-believe, and I can whip up fantastical stories in my head to keep them entertained. I talk to children with the same respect that I talk to most adults, and kids respond well to that, to not condescending to them. I knew I had made good when my best friend Rocio, who you heard in the first episode, told me that her daughter knew me by my name, while all her other friends were Mom of X. Like many women, I was told that one day my biological clock would start ticking, and the noise would become so deafeningly loud my whole existence would be one of turmoil until I had a baby of my own. That day never came. The closest I got to it was wanting a bulldog so badly I would stare longingly at pups in dog parks. I eventually got one of my own, Charlie. That's the last living creature I've ever wanted to take care of, and perhaps the only one that I've unconditionally loved, awaiting nothing in return. If a dog was enough to quiet the supposed urge, I can't imagine it was that strong to begin with. I'm someone who reacts badly to having my own personal freedom curtailed. I realized this when I was married. It's come up in the office jobs I've had. Depending on context, this can be one of my greatest strengths. But it can also be incredibly corrosive, spurning the worst of me. And the thing with kids, if you have even an ounce of decency, is that you can't just turn their backs on them. My former coworker, Rachel Birchie, interviewed me for her book, The Kids Are in Bed, about my decision to not have kids. Here's what I told her back in 2018. I don't have enough time to dedicate to my creative work as is. Having kids would take away from that even more, and my biggest fear is feeling resentful of my children. If I were a mom, I'd be a good mom. I'd make the necessary sacrifices. But I just don't think I want to do that, and I certainly wouldn't want to have kids that I blame for keeping me from my other dreams. I still feel the same way. Though now that so many of my dreams are unfulfilled, I'd add to that I feel relief at having only myself to blame. Because what would lead me to an existence of turmoil is the what if that would have haunted me had I had children, and against my better judgment, I would have projected that onto them. Well, these are my very existential reasons for not having kids. There are very mundane ones too. Children are endlessly fascinating. Child rearing, incredibly tedious. Few things have bored me more than being trapped in a dinner with mom friends who spent the entire 2 hours talking about the perils of formula or wondering about diaper brands. Your time is not your own, and you have to devote it to cleaning, wiping, feeding, sleeping, rinse, and repeat. Then they grow up, and you have to devote it to driving homework, asking them to clean up after themselves, petty arguments about play dates, rinse and repeat. And I was supposed to do this next to a man who, even if I lucked out and got a quote-unquote modern dad, would still never feel or be as obligated to their children as I would to deal with all of it. Perhaps the too long didn't read version of my decision was that I was not curious enough about motherhood to follow that path. But I also wonder if my decision was shaped by another factor. Being a mom in the United States felt impossible. And that is where I spent the bulk of my fertile, reproductive years. Between the lack of my own extended family to help me out, the non-existence of a social safety net for gestating people and parents in general, the exorbitant cost to maintain one person, let alone a mini-me, and on what full-time job, and in what expensive childcare situation, and a culture that seemed to both deify and demonize mothers, it looked suffocating. Honestly, parts of it sounded outright demeaning. And I say this having been surrounded all those years by so many bright, ambitious, creative, cool women who are somehow doing all that, a job, and getting way more ahead in their writing careers than I ever did. But I just couldn't shake off the idea that I would never have that stamina. And I'll admit, I didn't want to demand that of myself. But to help me get a sense of what raising kids in the United States versus raising kids in Peru would have been like, I had a nice long talk with a friend who could actually speak to that.
My name is Lizzette. Right now, I live in Lima. Right now, I'm in New York City because this is part of my life. I'm in between these two worlds.
Mm-hmm.
I am a freelancer. I'm a sociologist. So I work remotely from home, supporting UN agencies, governments, international cooperation, NGOs in their efforts to make gender equality a reality.
Last episode, I mentioned how I felt Rocio, my childhood best friend, and I were brought together by the universe. Something just as strange happens with Lizzette.
You're my only friend
Uh-huh.
who has been to the same places at the same time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which is a really nice coincidence
Uh-huh.
because these places where we have coincided are not always obvious.
Right.
And also not only in the physical places, but we have also shared life experiences like going to specific school together.
Yes.
Or, moving to live by yourself for university, like these life change experiences. I think we have lived them together, like at the same time.
Yeah, in tandem.
Right, in tandem. So that is very nice. That's how I met you, and that's how we have been able to be friends for a long time because we managed to move to the same places at the same time.
I know. We've hacked friendship. This is how you keep
Yeah.
friends. You just move to the same places at the same time. Lizzette grew up very much like me, bouncing around from one country to the next. In her case, between Peru, Colombia, and Mexico. During the brief period when she lived in Lima as a kid, she went to the same terrifying Catholic school I mentioned last episode, though she was a year below me. We weren't friends back then, but I recognized her waiting in the work-study line at McGill University and said, "Hey, didn't you go to Salcantay?" She became my connection to Peru while I was in Montreal. And after graduation, she bounced around Central America and Europe, even spent several years living in Papua New Guinea. When I moved back to New York after my decade in Chicago, Lizzette had already been living there for a while with Shani, her American husband, and Kila, her son who was then a baby. And while I was living, in many ways, a very different life than hers as a single woman with no kids, the universe kept wanting us to live our lives in tandem. I still remember that frigid February night, meeting up with her for dinner at Agi's counter and telling her over a plate of spatzel my deepest, darkest secret, that I was thinking of going back to Peru. Yo igual, she said, astonished, as we both dissolved into relief that we would keep each other company during this new phase in our lives too. During her pregnancy and the first 3 years of Kila's life, Lizzette lived in Brooklyn. Being a new mom in New York City had its perks. A lot of the ones she mentioned reminded me of my own idyllic American childhood, where access to the big city shaped so much of what I appreciate about art and culture today. She took her son to events at the Metropolitan Opera, to classes at the Brooklyn Art Museum. She loved that story time included LGBTQ plus stories and celebrated diversity, and that being a city kid had made Kila so open to playing with literally any child on the playground. But there was also a flip side to all that. What would you say were the difficult aspects of raising a kid in New York?
So that, I think my list is a bit longer, but I'm going to try to be specific and to the point. But one, of course, the cost of living, which is no surprise. I was paying almost, well, I won't give the number, but it was ridiculous, the amount of money I was paying for daycare.
Yeah.
And you don't have an option, right? Because you have to work full time. And I was very lucky because I was working for the UN. So I had a whole 6 months maternity leave, so I cannot complain. Like the average American, what is the maternity leave? 2 weeks, I think, and
I
you have to
think
go back.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone just like grabs all the vacation they have and all the
Exactly.
holidays. And from that, they get like 2 months or something. Actually, the US does not mandate any paid maternity or paternity leave. One of only 3 countries in the world to not do so. The Family Medical Leave Act of 1993 grants 12 weeks of unpaid leave to mothers in the states. 13 states and Washington, D.C., including New York, offer some form of paid leave, though Oregon is the only one to give you 100% of your pay. In Peru, mothers get 98 days of paid leave.
Second is the lack of support in the sense that is the informal and formal support. I won't compare New York to Lima because it's an industrialized city and country with a lot more money. But if you compare it to other countries in the developed world, I hate to use that word, but in the global north, as they call it, there is no state support for anything. Like you have to pay for absolutely everything, right? And it's very expensive. For example, I remember I was having a lot of issues trying to breastfeed. Like it's such a difficult for me experience and for many moms. There are breastfeeding consultants to help you for that. And it's like, okay, sure, yeah, it's $500 an hour and a half. And you're like, okay, sure. You know what I mean? Like every little detail. It's so expensive and no support. It's not like, oh, you can find an NGO who can help. No, like,
Right.
you know what I mean? So that type of support. And also, I would say that, of course, you don't live close to a family. So when you give birth or you have a kid, you need some quality time with your partner because you're going through so many changes.
Yeah.
And even that is difficult because you have to get a nanny for at least for 4 hours at night because you won't make her come from Queens or the Bronx for 2 hours. It's not a business for her.
Right.
So just going out is like the nanny time, the expensive New York restaurant, just to spend 2 hours with your husband.
Right.
You know?
And you're both tired and probably want to sleep.
Exactly. So you do all this effort and you put all this, planning and money, whatever. And then the day you're like dying. You just want to grab a cup of water and sit down outside your house. And finally, another, I think, challenge, at least for me, but I think it does happen a lot in the US, at least in New York City, is that here it attracts people who are really high achievers, who work really hard, who work in the best, whatever business in the private sector, or in my case, I'm a sociologist, so it's in the UN, whatever it is. But these spaces are very demanding. And especially you have a kid between 35 and 40 years old when you are growing in your career. So you're having a position with more responsibilities, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, you have to take care of a baby without support. I think that's another challenge because the workspace and wherever you're working cannot accommodate
Right.
your needs as a new mom, because you do have to be in that meeting at 4 p.m. when you want to pick up your kid from daycare and go to a park, right? And you cannot say no because you are in a position where already that's your responsibility. And there are not many options like the Scandinavian countries that you can work only 70% of your time, that sounds ideal.
No. It's like the US is set up to be completely incompatible with parenthood and especially motherhood,
100%. And I mean, and many places are like that, but compared to developed countries, that's the part that drives me crazy because you see all these happiness indexes. And in the US, it's always rating the worst in happiness as parents compared to your other peers who do not have kids.
Lizzette had always dreamed of going back to Peru for professional reasons. There's a lot of social tension and complexity and dynamics here that are catnip for sociologists like her. So it wasn't that she necessarily planned on going back to Lima when she had Keela, but more like motherhood coincided with a vocational crisis of her own. She had been working relentlessly for the past 7 years, and the added stress of motherhood was draining her dry. She knew something had to give.
I usually try to go to Peru once a year for Christmas to see family, and because I like the beach in Lima. I went back home and I started to notice how moms live in Lima. And I'm like, wait, what?
And you're like, they look happy and refreshed.
Exactly. They don't look like with huge eye bags, like dying. And I was like, what is this? Because, I had no idea of Lima as a mom because when I
Right.
left, I was young and single. Lima as a mom, it didn't come across my mind at all. I never had small or young cousins, so I didn't live the whole kids in Peru through family or anything. And when my friends had families, I wasn't in Lima.
Right.
So I had no idea.
During those visits, she realized what she would have access to by being a mom in Lima, like access to cheap but good organic produce, or the sheer number of kids in parks. The fact that Gila would grow up surrounded by grandparents and develop an emotional connection to them beyond FaceTime. Lizzette also had the benefit of being married to someone who was game for a transcontinental move. Cheney was from the United States, but he had also lived all over the world, mainly in Eastern Europe and Africa. He was fluent in Spanish, so there wouldn't be a language barrier when it came to getting jobs. Having spent so much time in cities in the global south, and we're just going to continue using that term as a shorthand, but not as a statement of judgment, if you will. Anyways, back to Cheney. Having spent so much time in cities in the global south, Cheney knew what a place like Lima could be like. But there was also one important factor that really made him be on board.
When I ask him always oh, wow, what motivated you to come to Lima? I mean, with me, to say yes to this idea. He always says that he loved the idea that Kila could speak his own language and could get to see his own roots, which I think for someone who has moved a lot, having strong roots is very important for your life.
Yeah.
So that was the most important thing for him was I'm going to help my kid, develop those and get to know his roots, where he's from at this time when he's a kid, when he's a baby and a toddler and kid, because this is the time where also you start making sense of the world around you, right?
Yeah. Oh, Cheney, that's so enlightened of him.
Yeah, I must
always
give him...
surprising when a man does something or says something like that. The importance of Gila knowing his roots was something Lizzette also shared, given her own nomadic childhood. Growing up, she was proud to be Peruvian, and knowing where she was from kept her grounded. She wanted Gila to feel comfortable in Spanish and to also connect with the Quechua-speaking side of her family.
Felt like there was a calling. I don't know how to say it.
Yeah.
It was a calling to go back. And I decided to take the risk and quit everything, quit stability, quit a good salary, to go back to my roots and listen to that call that at that moment I was feeling it. So also that was the main reason why I decided, okay, this is it. I have to go and go now.
I totally relate to this urge Lizzette describes. The only time I ever seriously considered children was when I was married. Even then, I knew deep down inside that if I had them, it would only have been to make my ex-husband happy and fulfill what was expected of me. What can I say? It took divorce and the fallout that comes with it for me to finally take my own desires seriously. But when I was imagining myself as a mother in Chicago, the idea of not giving my children the childhood I had filled me with sadness. Sure, maybe they didn't need to move around as much, but I hated the idea of their world being smaller than mine by default. I worried about how I was going to instill in them a sense of Peruvian pride in a country that often did its best to make Latinos ashamed of their background. I amused myself with images of them trying so earnestly to come into a sense of their own, like several U.S. Latinos I had met who showed up with t-shirts of the Che Guevara and with the phrase, "We didn't cross the border crossed us," once they hit college and started to deconstruct everything they had been taught about who they were. I imagined that cringe moment when I would have to tell my kids that the Che was Argentinian and that phrase only applied to Mexico, really. And though I'm being tongue-in-cheek right now, teasing these hypothetical children in my mind, I know I would have shared their heartbreak. For all those faux pas would have just been a symptom of a longing they could very well spend a lifetime trying to fill. I know that better than anyone. So Lizzette, Cheney, and Gila made the move. Join our Patreon community for as little as $3 a month and help keep this podcast going. There's a lot of benefits in there, like a thank you shout out right here on the pod, a group chat, maybe even a travel itinerary curated by yours truly. But right now, I think I want to talk to you about a secret food map. Paying members get access to a Google map where I have recorded every restaurant I've ever loved from my travels for like the past 5 years or so. It is a treasure trove and worth every penny. So, if you're intrigued and you love this podcast and you want to have access to all these goodies, fine, but you can't stay here on Patreon. Now, Lizzette wants to stress that she doesn't want to romanticize life in Peru. Parenthood is challenging everywhere. And we're also about to describe a version of motherhood in Peru that is specific to upper middle class, college educated, white collar workers in Lima, which is a universe unto itself. This would be a very different episode if I was describing motherhood in low income sectors of the city, motherhood in the Andes, or motherhood in the Amazon. In a country where teenage pregnancy rates are sky high, many as a result of sexual violence, there are plenty of non-dreamy, extremely difficult depictions of motherhood here. But this is a podcast about my own Peruvian reality, and if I had kids, it would probably look more like Lizette's experience. There were certain aspects of being a mom in Lima that felt like upgrades to her. Lima is right on the ocean, and it's easy for Lizzette to squeeze in a quick dip for an hour or so at least once a week. She has one of the greatest palates of people I know, and she could finally feed Gila the way she wanted to. Her work-life balance is way more manageable, and she's tapped into a sheer number of healers, both Western and not, that reside in Lima. Her well-being has improved thanks to affordable acupuncturists, yoga classes she has time for, and child development therapists that give her tools. Even small things like finding good quality clothes for Gila at half the price has been a plus.
I am back to having time to go out with friends. I'm able to celebrate my friends' birthdays, parties, you know. As I said before, it's easy kind of to ask for grandma or a friend or even the nanny, please help me tonight. Like, I want to do that. So that gives you a lot of space and time to enjoy not only with your friends, but also for your own self, for your own time, you know? Like in New York, I didn't have time for anything.
But there are other aspects that are less pleasant, even though she kind of knew they were inevitable, having lived in Lima before.
Gila is a very social kid. As a New Yorker, he was born in New York. He liked to talk to anyone. When we arrived to Lima, we were very surprised how close people. I mean, I wasn't surprised because I'm from Peru, I'm from Lima. I know how close they are. But kids, you know what I mean? I was like, wow. That was the first kind of like compared to a playground in New York, Brooklyn. You know, Lima was a bit different. Yeah, there are 200 kids. But having access to those kids is not that obvious.
Right.
Of course, once you start going off into the park and they know you and it's beautiful. Yeah, they do accept you. You know, it's like a tribe, almost like.
Right. They have to like induct you. The reified, hierarchical, classist, and extremely cliquish nature of Lima society is very complex. And it does start this young. But what I want to draw attention to right now is how it factors into a long-standing Peruvian institution, the nanny.
And then I started to understand there's a whole culture of the nanny that takes care of the kid, and then the kid only hangs out first with the nephews, with the cousins, with the people they know. So the kid is not very open to talk to a kid that he doesn't know at all. It's hard for me, the relationship between nannies and parents, and you know what I mean, the whole class issue. That was hard for me, and it's still hard.
Plenty of families in the United States have a nanny, and plenty of those nannies come from low-income communities or are often racialized minorities. Many are immigrants from countries like Peru. But plenty of U.S. families also hire college-educated young nannies who see it as a stepping stone before they get their first big girl or big boy job. Most nannies in the U.S. are still white, and the demographic breakdown of the profession roughly reflects that of the population at large. Hell, if they work for the right family, nannies can make absolute bank, at least according to that Hulu reality show I need to watch. Nevertheless, it continues to be the least common choice for childcare in the U.S. The percentage of parents who choose to hire nannies in the U.S. are somewhere between 5 to 12%. It's hard to get concrete stats on what the nanny situation is in Peru, or even just in Lima, since they are often informal workers, meaning they don't have written contracts or are registered in any way. But according to market studies, about 75% of families in what we call the A socioeconomic sector of Peru, which represents the wealthiest segment of Peru, employs at least one regular domestic worker at home. Most of the workers tend to come from low-income sectors of the city or the provinces outside the capital city. Because class and race in Peru are often intimately intertwined, many of the domestic workers are of indigenous descent, and many of their Sector A employers are white, or more on the whitish side of the mestizo equation. Again, race and class are really complicated, and they merit their own episode sometime in the future. So I won't get into the thorny topic of what constitutes white in Peru right now. But let's just say that if you make enough money to be considered part of the A sector, you'll often be perceived as white or in close proximity to whiteness, regardless of your actual ethnic background. Well, if you work as a nanny for one of those families, you will not. In short, the class issues between nannies and employers are deep and obvious and speak to massive social and economic gaps within the country. I've had a hard time tracking down exact studies to back up what I've observed about the relationship between nannies and employers. So let's say that all I'm offering right now is anecdotal evidence deep from within the bowels of Sector A. Growing up, almost everyone I knew had an empleada who lived inside their homes. The empleada was more of a housekeeper than a nanny. She cooked, cleaned, ran small errands, and would look after the kids when no other adult was at home. One empleada was enough for the whole family, and yes, it was often exploitative, 24/7, relentless work. They were often poorly paid, though back when I was a kid, Peru's economy was so bad that it was often the only source of employment for women who came from rural areas and who had only access to very basic education. My family had empleadas when we lived in Latin America, none for most of the years we lived in the United States. I loved many of them. Gina and I bonded over how much we loved books. I read my stories out loud to Medium. But they weren't really my nannies. They tended to housework, and their long list of tasks did not include playing with me, tending to my emotional and intellectual needs, or accompanying me wherever I went, like a ghost cursed to follow my every move. And this was mostly the dynamic I saw replicated in other households. Fast forward to today, and in many ways, the situation for domestic workers has improved. Perhaps the most obvious way of pointing this out is that it's so hard to find one, at least according to WhatsApp and Facebook groups I'm privy to, and according to my mom. And that's because Peru's economic boom of the past 20 years has given low-income women other outlets, some that are way better paid. In 2020, a new law on domestic workers was enacted, which established workweek limits, paid vacations, minimum wage, and mid-year and end-of-year bonuses. Employers also had to ensure the domestic workers were registered in the public healthcare system. In other words, domestic workers went from being cheap labor to less cheap labor. No way am I going to go so far as to say it's well paid. But hiring someone suddenly became a planned for line item in a household budget instead of a given for people from Sector A who usually thought of them as their right. So now I don't know many people who've hired a live-in empleada. Usually they hire someone to come in a couple of times a week to clean. Except when it comes to nannies. While the presence of a live-in empleada has gone down, the proliferation of nannies has gone way up. It's not just that every family with kids under the age of 12 has one. It's that they hire individual nannies for every single child that is in their families. Some parents have a weekday nanny, a night nanny, a weekend nanny. And it's not just that the nannies follow these kids around the house or when taking them to the park. They're expected to show up at birthday parties, play dates, the beach club, literally anywhere the kid might be, regardless of whether their parents are there or their friends' parents are there. And look, I'm not going to begrudge anyone who hires them. Daycare isn't really a thing in Lima. You can put your kids in nursery schools, some of which are a pipeline to pricey private schools, but most nursery schools end around noon. You can't always rely on family members to help you out, especially if you have parents who still work, are ill, or simply do not want to. Though I have to admit that I've seen way more grandparents taking kids to classes, taking their granddaughters and grandsons to birthday parties when the mom can't or when for whatever reason the nanny cannot. So the abuelos and the abuelas are also busting their ass, but it's not always enough. Moms here can be just as focused on their careers as in the States, and they don't necessarily want to opt out. There's also a question of, can they even afford to? While life in Lima is cheaper than New York, that's not saying much. It doesn't make Lima a cheap city to raise kids. The public education system is abysmal, so parents send their kids to private school if they can afford it. Safety is an issue even in the nicest neighborhoods, where property is pretty expensive. The public healthcare system is overburdened and falling apart, so people turn to private insurance, which they might have to pay out of pocket for, or they might need to work full-time to get through their employer. Many of the moms I know work because they need that dual income. Straight up, if I had kids in Peru, I would hire nannies as well. But it is kind of jarring to see kids with a personal assistant by their side since birth, catering to their every need. At best, the relationship is one of mutual care and respect. The nanny is another adult that children can turn to for support. But at worst, it makes kids incredibly codependent, unprepared to do even basic things like play on their own, and it can give them an overblown sense of their own importance. And I know you're probably thinking that you wouldn't participate in all this. And maybe you are the kind of person that would really stick to those principles. I personally have yet to meet a person of means who decides to forgo the nanny. And I personally have yet to meet a foreigner who decides they won't hire a nanny to help with childcare. Now, whether your kid turns into a spoiled brat or a level-headed adult will, to some extent, depend on how you navigate the nanny, which is one way of saying it will depend on how you navigate the class trappings of Lima society. Honestly, it's what I consider the most challenging aspect of raising kids here. Lizzette, as a sociologist, a self-aware person, and all-around kind human being, understood this. Here's what she did.
Because when I moved to Lima, I moved to this neighborhood that is close to Surquillo, which is a neighborhood that is more middle class and that it has amazing food places, restaurants to it. But it's just more simple, you know, and I like to move from Surquillo to Miraflores and live in this. I mean, again, I'm talking with privilege because I'm choosing where to live. But again, I was trying to connect to those parts to Lima that I like. And as an adult, I was able to do that. But what I had to do was to find the right space and meet Peruvians who think more like me. There are many bubbles, like anywhere, because in New York, I also was living in a bubble. But I had to find my bubble. There is more people who think more similar to me, right? So I decided to enroll Kila in school that, of course, I'm not saying it's perfect or anything, but at least there's more likelihood that you meet other parents who also have a similar way of thinking
Right.
of you in terms of class and race. So that also helped me to find my bubble there.
Mhm.
Another positive surprise was the moms groups.
I know. I am very jealous of your
Oh
mom
my
groups. I'm like
God.
convinced that in order for me to have friends in Lima, I need to like become a mom, but I don't want to become a mom.
Yeah, we have to find a solution to that
Yeah, but
somehow.
I would steal
Yeah.
a kid so I could go to the mom groups, which is not something that I feel in the States. In the States, I'm like, oh my God, I would
Exactly.
rather die than be in my mom group. No offense to mom groups in the States, but the vibes I got were always intense, at least in places like Chicago and New York, where they seemed to be populated by women who had transferred all the energy that had put them through law school or Wall Street into child rearing. But in Lima, Lizzette found that mom groups are filled with women who are resourceful, ready to connect her with job opportunities, or an uncle or an aunt who somehow knew exactly the right way to fix something. Her being a mom also gave her a social life. As an unmarried woman in her 40s with no kids, I seemed to be completely cut out from most opportunities to make friends in Lima. Not for whatever stereotypical, outdated image people might have of Latin America. I'm not a pariah, for God's sake. And societies change over time. Peru's overall fertility rate has been decreasing over the decades, plummeting to 1.96 births per woman in 2026. It's even lower in Lima at around 1.5. What might shock some people, because it shocked me, is that 8 out of 10 mothers in Peru are single moms, though this alarming statistic requires some caveats. Single moms include women who have a boyfriend that just does not happen to live with them, women who are separated, women who are divorced or widowed, and yes, women who are 100% single with no co-parent in sight. But still, that means that only about 20 to 30% of moms are married, for realsies married. And most of these single moms are not in their situation for empowering, cool reasons like freezing their eggs, finding a sperm donor, and fulfilling their desire to have a kid come what may. Given that abortion is illegal, except when a woman's life is at risk, or in the case of rape and incest, I have to wonder how many of these women would have made different choices. But I do not want to wade too deep into the grim realities of reproductive health in Peru, or the rampant sexual violence that exists, or the epidemic of men who simply fuck off when their partner tells them they're pregnant. What I do want to point out is that being unmarried doesn't carry a social stigma here. In fact, Peru has a very low marriage rate, hovering at 2 marriages for every 1,000 residents. But again, this statistic needs a bunch of other caveats around it. Because while Peruvians don't really marry, what you do have is a lot of cohabitation, a lot of de facto unions, but not the actual piece of paper that states you are husband and wife. People here really do love to be partnered up. Maybe this is also a good time to note that gay marriage or civil unions for LGBTQ couples do not exist in Peru, which makes it an outlier in South America. Yes, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Colombia, Ecuador, and Chile have legalized gay marriage, and Bolivia allows civil unions. Not Peru. But back to the Straits. Because marriages are so low, our divorce rate is also low, though they've tripled in the last 5 years. This is such a long-winded way of saying no one has made a big deal about me being divorced. No one has made me feel weird for deciding not to have children either. The reaction I get is very similar to the ones I got in the States. Jokes from frazzled moms about how much they envy my freedom. Or, little comments about how they knew that I was always the smart one in the group. Stuff like that. But the sector with the highest marriage rates in Lima is Sector A. And by the time women reach my age, they at least have one kid. In that, the United States and Peru are similar. But Lima is still a society where life is very structured around the idea of a traditional family. Even though in practice, the society itself no longer reflects that traditional nuclear structure. For people in their 40s, all social life seems to revolve around birthday parties, school events, dinner parties with other couples, and mom groups. Granted, the same could be said of a lot of suburbs in the US. I have plenty of married friends in the United States, and their whole social life revolved around their children too. But in the US, you do have places like New York or Chicago, and I'm assuming LA and Portland and, I don't know, Miami. What's going on in Miami? You'll have to tell me. But you do have cities like that, where it's easier to find adults who've chosen the same lifestyle as you. Plus, my married mom friends often used me as an outlet to get a taste of their old single life. They might have only been able to do it once every 6 months, but they would find ways to grab cocktails with me at that hip bar, share appetizers at a too loud restaurant, belled out Lady Gaga at late night karaoke, even shake that ass at a Brooklyn club ironically playing early 2000s hits. There's no equivalent in Peru. Meaning there's no bigger city in Peru than Lima, no more liberal city in Peru than Lima. As the big capital city, you'd think Lima would operate more like a Latin version of New York or Chicago. But it's not what happens. Instead, I find myself hoping and praying that couples will just take me in. I'm 44. I'm perfectly fine going to your Saturday afternoon barbecue with no man by my side, but an army of funny stories to charm the children mingling about. Like, I too want to go to bed at a respectable hour most nights. And it's not that Lima moms don't go out for a girls' night. It's that they only seem to do it with other moms. They disappear into their mom friend groups. I don't even think there's a conscious, malicious intent behind it. After all, it's natural to gravitate towards those who are going through similar life stages as you are. But I also think the reasons are even more mundane than that. I simply don't have daily access to the same group of like-minded adults that Lizzette does by sheer virtue of dropping off her kid at school or being added to the classroom's WhatsApp group. Deliberate choices like mine are still rare and far between. And so finding others who've chosen the same path are rare and far between. To be honest, I don't even know where to look. Do you think I should stay here?
Yes. You know, whenever we talk about our experience in Lima, I notice how different it is as a mom than as a person who decided to be single.
Yeah.
I cannot compare my experience with yours because it's very different. But listening to you, I would say you should stay for the moment, but I would consider doing that digital thing around the world.
Yeah.
Because I must say that Lima, as a single person, especially woman and Latina woman, because we have talked about this, like if you're like a British man living single in Lima, the situation is very different.
Oh yeah, they're kings here. They have nothing to
kings.
complain about. Yeah.
Nothing. But I try to put myself in your shoes, and I don't know if I would be able to live fully in Lima. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I do see the challenges of the social life.
So yes, not being a mom makes for an isolated existence here. Not enough for me to change my stance on having children, though. But while I've always been ambivalent about motherhood, I have always, always, always wanted to be an aunt, a tia. When my brother Cote texted the family to tell us that his wife Fatima was pregnant, I cried. I was sitting at a donut shop in downtown Chicago with my then boyfriend, who I think saw a glimmer of hope when he noticed me tearing up over the news that I was going to be an aunt. Sadly for him, the prospect of having a nephew did nothing to change my views about being a mom. But it was surprising, even to me, how feral my love for my nephews was, compared to when I heard friends tell me about their offspring, as much as I love my friends and their kids. When I got news that Marcelo was born in 2018, The first thought that came to mind was that I had to learn how to sword fight so I could stave off anyone who dared attack him. I'm not kidding. I envisioned myself in full samurai gear chopping off the head of an imaginary villain. I never had that reaction with my friends' kids. My youngest nephew, Leon, was born in October of 2023. I was visiting Peru at the time and was already debating internally whether I should go back. I was still so unsure about the decision, so ashamed of not having made it in the United States. I was stressed out over money, always. And this was all very embarrassing to me back then, so I kept the idea of moving back to myself. But as my family and I lingered in the waiting room of the hospital for news about the baby, I thought of the kind of world Leon would be born into. There was the Russian invasion of Ukraine occupying the news. This was only a week or so after the Hamas-led October 7th attacks and the brutal genocidal acts of the Israeli government in retaliation. Peru was still reeling from deadly protests early in the year that had left 18 people dead in the Andean city of Juliaca. I'm sure there was some natural disaster that was also hitting the airwaves. The global economy seemed to work for no one except Elon, and we were all rotting our brains by doom scrolling. There was so much to be grim about, and it would have been understandable for me to take all those thoughts and think, how can you bring a kid into a world like this? But honestly, all I could think that day was how lucky Leon was to have parents that had the means to put a roof over his head and food in his stomach. He had no idea that he had already won the life lottery by coming into this world to live in a nice neighborhood, be taught in good schools, be expected to have a university career. He would get to travel, spend summers at the beach, never want for anything. But more than that, he was born into a family that wanted him and loved him so deeply. My tias were very influential in my life. When I was very young, our family lived with my grandparents and my tia Cucuchi, who was a 20-something college student back then with a lot of sass and a bit of a temper. My sister, my cousin Maria, and I used to annoy the hell out of her by digging into her makeup stash and hovering around her room. But there was something so enigmatic about seeing a cool, hot young woman living, starting a career, falling in love, going out on the town. Growing up, my sister and I often spent summers with my tia Lili in Venezuela, who would put us to work at her toy store and teach us blackjack and other card games at night. My tia Marisa had a massive collection of romance novels that I devoured the summer I moved back to Peru, comforted by their fantasies and absolutely grossed out by their explicit dirty scenes, an effective mode of turning me off sex for a good chunk of my teen years. I wouldn't have known the effect they had on me then, but now I see how my tias instilled in me a sense of independence, a sense of drive, and the value of marching to the beat of your own drum. I wanted so badly to be that for Marce and Leon. I wanted so badly to be part of their world and not just hear about it from afar. And when I thought about it like that, coming back to Peru didn't feel like a loser's choice, because to be a caring presence for a child is the opposite of failure. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm fulfilling my auntie vocation. It's a fantastic deal. I get to spoil them rotten and then hand them off to their parents when they start to get fussy. I run around with them, draw sea monsters, play board games, and not lose one iota of sleep over how best to discipline them. Sure, I want to be a force for good and a positive influence, but I also can't help but laugh if they inadvertently say a bad word. I love going to their soccer classes in the park.
Goal!
But I can skip if a day is too busy, if I have social plans, if I simply don't feel like it. And no one will judge me for it. My Sundays are very different now than when I lived in the States. Instead of brunching it up with friends or spending the day prepping meals for the following week, I usually spend it having lunch with my parents, my siblings, my sister-in-law, and the nephews. They come in like tornadoes of love, hell-bent on destroying everything in their pathway to both impress you and remind you that they exist. My birthdays are different. My preferred way of celebrating is traveling on my own, but now I have to schedule time for cake and gift exchanges. Not because I care, but because the nephews find it exciting to give me presents, like the 1,000-piece puzzle of Van Gogh's Starry Nights that they gave me this year. which they insisted on opening for me.
¿Qué es?
They sit on my lap to sing happy birthday and help me blow out the candles. They poke around my room to see all the strange knickknacks I have, pretending to type at my laptop. Marce demands that I play Clue with him. He talks to me about movies. Leon is more like a cat. It's best to ignore him for a bit until he warms up to you. Though I suggest singing this banger. Las ruedas del autobús girando van, girando van, girando van. I would do anything for these kids. Which is why when my gynecologist told me that my eggs were kaput, I woke up the next day and hit a weight class, even though I loathe physical exertion. I don't have a spouse to look after me when I age, and frankly, I doubt I'll get one. I won't have kids to do it either. My 2 nephews will have their own parents to look after, not to mention any spouses and children they'll have on their own. I hope they love me enough, and that our relationship over their lifetime will be strong enough to make them want to check in on me in my old age. But I don't want them to carry an additional emotional or financial load because of my personal choices. And this prospect doesn't scare me by the way. I've already spent a lifetime looking after myself. And what's another 44 years? Because while there are experiences I'm missing out on by not having children, there's so many others that I have access to. Like the ability to pick up my bags on a whim and leave Lima whenever I want and for whatever reasons I want, no matter how silly or grand. Now, if only I could make up my mind about that. All right, Lizzette. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for being here. And let me know where you move to next, because I'll just move there. It'll be fine. That's my solution.
Cool. Let's move to Dakar. That's next.
Thank you for listening to But You Can't Stay Here. This episode was written and produced by me, Ines Bellina. The show artwork was created by my sister, Ines Bellina. I also want to thank Lizzette Soria for being so candid about her family life. I also want to give a big thanks to Rich Frontes for being one of our Patreon members. I'm so sorry if I butchered your last name, Rich. Rich has been supporting my work for so long, starting with my newsletter, and I know he is passionate about Latin American culture and literature. I hope this feeds into your lifelong interest with the region. If you want to join the community and get your very own podcast shout out, among other perks, find us on Patreon at But You Can't Stay Here. Most memberships include the paid version of my newsletter, The Cranky Guide, which you can find on Substack. Follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and most major podcast platforms. You can also follow the show on Instagram at But You Can't Stay Here Pod for updates, and me at Ines.Bellina for a look into my Lima life. Finally, please extend your support to your local immigrant rights group. I'm very aware that my indecision is a privilege that many immigrants don't get to enjoy. Right now, I'm holding in my thoughts the families of Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, Juan Sebastián Durán Guerrero, and Juan Jairo Coronilla Durán. To find out how you can support their families and advocate for justice in their cases, please visit the League of United Latin American Citizens, or LULAC, which has been fighting for Latino civil rights since 1929. This isn't a paid ad by any means. If I say anything that you find offensive, it is not a reflection of LULAC or anything like that. The reason I'm mentioning them is that I just really like what they're doing during these awful times. Their website is lulac.org. Till next time, hasta luego.